Hi, Corinne. Hi, Aram. Today we depart from poetry for prose with two terrific writers, Diane McBain, who unfortunately cannot be with us today, and Aram Saroyan. Diane McBain called me about a half an hour ago and said she just got back from the doctor and was not well enough to read today. The magnificent actor, Corinne Conley, whom I asked if she would step in, said yes, and read from Diane's second novel, The Color of Hope. So I will say a few words about Diane in her absence. Diane McBain had a career as a model in her teen years, then in movies and TV. She later parlayed her fame into work she did for the USO, visiting Vietnam twice, working for the homeless, for victims of rape and abuse, for access by women to get hard to afford mammograms, and she served 3 years on the board of the Screen Actors Guild. After retiring, she chose to fulfill a lifelong ambition to write novels. After getting her biography, famous enough, a Hollywood memoir published, she went to work on her first novel, The Laughing Bear, and now she has published her second, The Color of Hope. The Color of Hope has been nominated for Best Novel in the African American category for the first National Independent Book Awards. And as I said earlier, Corinne Conley stepped in at the last minute, and she will be reading cold from The Color of Hope by Diane McBain. Here's a magnificent reader, actor, Corinne Conley.
Thank you, Harry. Diane, I hope you're feeling good. I love your stories, and I'm happy to read this, so I want to do you proud. Chapter 1, July 14th, 1946. The extreme heat of the day bleached the landscape, and perspiration bathed two men as they faced off. They were clearly at vast odds with each other. One man, Barnett Hester, was a young, outwardly well-off farmer, his station in life signaled by his jacket and crisp fedora. The other was a black laborer, Roger Malcolm, only 24 years old. He was tall and skinny, dressed in overalls with a stained, dirty shirt. He wore a cap on his head. Malcolm was drunk with rage. The distinctions of class separated these two former playmates like a machete separates a stalk from its roots. A hawk flew overhead, cawing, as if in warning of an impending disaster. Fields of white cotton loomed in the background, crackling with the deep heat of the summer day. Goddamn N-word. Come and get it, you black-ass no-good. Hester owned the farm on which the two men stood and where they played as children only a few years before. There were a day when we played here as kids, but we've come a long fur way from then, Roger Malcolm angrily replied. He held a knife, but Hester had his ace in the hole, a pistol in his pocket. Both men were aware of the odds. They knew one would die today or would be badly wounded. Equal in age and strength, the two men dripped in perspiration from the hot sun and the enormous tension created between them. What you done's unforgivable, Hester M's. Hester M's wife belonged to me. You soiled her, Malcolm accused. You woman is common law wife, and she is free to do whatever she wants. She didn't want you. The words spat out of Malcolm's mouth like fire. You took her and raped her. The entire Hester family stood near the door on the wraparound porch. Ida, Hester's wife, came to the door. terrified for both men. The hatred that flamed between them was palpable to the dismayed family who watched. Hester lunged at the legs of Malcolm, which took him off balance and decked him. They scuffed in the dirt road that fronted the house, each overcoming the other as they fought it out. The dust choked each man, making the confrontation all the more vexing. At last, the knife held by Malcolm rose in the sky as Hester reached for his pistol. The knife plunged into Hester's stomach, and the force of it drove the blade into his intestines, taking the strength from him. His gun flew. Blood poured, covering the dirt beneath him, staining it a dark crimson and causing him to retch. The wife's screams were heard over the whole valley and reached the ears of the entire farm. Farmhands, their wives and children, ran from their cottages, leaving noonday meals to discover where the screams came from. "I'll kill him," shrieked Hester's brother as he moved after Malcolm, his arm caught by Ida. "No, you won't," she ordered decisively. No, the others objected. "He has to pay. He's a damned..." Inward. "And he has to die." "No, you let the law take care of it," she continued. "We need you here, not in a jail cell." Soon the sheriff drove up and gathered Malcolm into the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind his back as the others, accompanied by the farmhands, angrily looked on. July 23rd, 1946. It was several days later, and the entire valley had heard the news. Hester was in a local Georgia hospital, tenuously clinging to life, while Malcolm sat in a jail cell. Rumors abounded in the valley located in Monroe, a major cotton farming town some 40 miles east of Atlanta. Dorothy, Roger's woman, was at the cottage of her friends May Murray Dorsey and her husband George, also a dirt-poor black laborer working the farm of Loy Harrison, another white Monroe farmer who needed workers for cotton harvesting. "We got to get Roger out of jail," Dorothy cried. "He was only defending my honor. You know that," she demanded. The summer air still bristled with a powerful heat as all three trudged to the main house on the property to confront Harrison. "We come to get Malcolm out of jail," Dorothy pleaded. "You know you're short of hands, and harvest time's right around the corner." Dorothy's face prickled with perspiration as she pled her case to Harrison. "My husband's a good worker, and you know that." Soon Harrison drove his yellow Chevy downtown to secure Malcolm's release, with Dorothy, May, and George in the car, all steaming with desperation. Harrison had agreed to make a deal with the sheriff, a common practice with cotton farmers, allowing inmates to work off the amount of bail in the fields rather than rot in jail awaiting trial. The sheriff reluctantly agreed to the deal, warning Harrison to make sure Malcolm was returned as soon as the harvest was done. "You be sure he don't get away now, you hear? Or my ass will be in big trouble," the sheriff asserted with all the certainty he felt in his gut. The townspeople would surely destroy him. The day was getting late, but the heat from the unremitting sun didn't abate as Harrison, with the two black couples in tow, drove out of the Monroe town on the way back to the Harrison farm. They approached a wood slat crossing called Moore's Ford Bridge, spanning the Appalachie River. Its vapor hung in the air like a heavy shroud. On the other side of the bridge stood a cadre of angry and armed white men. Their fedoras crunched atop their heads, dressed in rolled-up shirts, some coldly chewing tobacco. The leader was an older man, about 60, with a pot belly and white hair. He gnawed angrily on a cigar. Squinting in the hot sun from inside the Chevy, Harrison drew a labored breath. Oh, Lord, here we go. The men were menacing as they confronted the yellow Chevy, stopping it in its tracks. With nowhere to go, the group in the car was enveloped with terror as they found themselves surrounded by the armed whites. Where's that N-word boy that tried to kill my neighbor, Barnett Hester? The leader howled into the Chevy. You can't take him. I just paid money for his release. He gotta pay me back with his labor. Harrison's voice was shrill with fear. You a N-word lover, white boy? Asked the leader. No, just a farmer who needs hands, Harrison pleaded. I paid good money. Too bad. No colored ass gonna get away with stabbing my friend and neighbor. The men forced the car doors open and brutally dragged the Negroes, both men and both women, from the car, throwing them onto the farm road. The dirt choked the air and strangled their nostrils. Get the rope and string him up, the leader demanded. My husband was defending my honor, Dorothy screamed. He raised his hand against Dorothy and knocked her to the ground. The men sniggered at her bold insolence. In fact, as long as we got 'em, why don't we just hang 'em all up? We don't got enough rope for that, a short white man with the rope yelled as he tried to get the twine around Malcolm's neck. Malcolm was much taller, and the man's effort was comical. The men roared with laughter at the sight. Tie him up, then, ordered the leader. I know who they are, May Murray yelled. I've seen you before. You're No, hissed Dorothy. Shut up your mouth, she urged her friend. With help from the others, the man tied the group together as they screamed and whimpered in their terror, knowing that what would come next. Thunderous shots rang out in the searing hot summer afternoon, leaving all four dying in pools of their own blood. It wasn't long after the white murderers fled that townspeople who knew a lynching was coming down and some who had witnessed the carnage came around to ogle the dead black laborers and their wives. One woman proudly held a tooth her boyfriend gave her and gleefully vowed to wear it on her charm bracelet. Another young man, dressed in an army uniform fresh from basic training, was fascinated. He had witnessed the whole event from a hiding place in a nearby grove of trees. Feeling as if he had been reborn on this gruesome day, he severed the finger of Malcolm, the man whose fate the other three had fallen heir to, palmed it so no one could see what he had done, and walked away whistling. His name was Zachary Hughes. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. I'm just discovering this story the same as you are. I'm quite breathless here. Early summer 2019. The trip from Cleo Henderson's neighborhood in Watts to the address in Glendale, California, would take an hour and a half by rail and bus, plus walking time. It would be another hour and a half back, not counting the problems of traffic. Cleo would board the blue train at the Rosa Parks station at 103rd Street, where the old Pacific Electric used to be. Her mom told her that. The train passed by the projects. Along the way, Cleo noticed block-long sections of homeless encampments. She got off at 7th and Flower in downtown Los Angeles and then walked to Olive to catch the bus to Glendale. On her walk, she noticed a lot of homeless people. One woman caught her eye. The woman, dressed in white shirt and slacks, carried a white sack, maybe a pillowcase, apparently filled with her life possessions. A shaggy dog like a Shih Tzu trotted behind her on a leash, his white whiskers and withers stained with dirt and oil. There was so much strife in the world, and Cleo knew she would always have to struggle. That was part of her culture, the culture of being Black in a white world. She only hoped she would not have to strive as the white woman with the little dog. She wondered how the woman had gotten there. She apparently enjoyed a much better lifestyle than the one she had now, and Cleo felt bad for her. The long commute was a huge problem because it took Cleo away from her favorite job of rearing her young son, Shamal, now a 6-year-old child. She knew her mom would do her best to keep an eye on him after school, but Edith was aging in ways she hadn't expected, and Cleo worried about the job of looking after Jamal would be too much for her. More than anything, she wanted to afford to stay at home, to be the mom she dreamed of being. There was no way to make a living and be with her son. Cleo's young age was the obstacle she faced as she awaited the public transportation that would take her to this new assignment. Men, young enough to be in junior high and old enough to be her grandfather, plus everything in between, ogled her and her breasts as she walked toward the train station, making her feel conspicuous. She wished they wouldn't stare. A cop joined the chorus of onlookers, and the fear made her want to flee. She just wanted to be seen and treated as human, not as a sexual object, not as a Black person, not as a whore or whatever objectified symbol men came up with. Cleo remembered when, as a teen, one of her friends came to school one day dressed like she wanted attention, notice from the boys. She and her high school friends had made a pact early on to marry as virgins, to stay away from sex. It had been hard to do as they grew older, and their boyfriends would dump them for not putting out. When she fell for her future husband, Jesse Henderson, it had become impossible. And when she got pregnant just before graduating, they did marry. But she had not kept her promise. Not that any of the other girls did either. She found the temptations too great. Since she had done better, especially when it became obvious Jesse was playing around with other women. Her son, Jamal, depended on her, and she was determined to be a good mom. No running around like some of her friends did, often getting stoned or drunk and landing in bed with some dude she'd never want to see again. She knew very little about the man she was assigned to. Was his name Zachary Hughes? He was 94 years old and had suffered a stroke, which made him unable to take care of himself. She wondered just how feeble he would be. Would she have to take him to the bathroom every time and maybe even wipe his butt? Probably this would be the case. She knew he was a white man, but that was all. White and ancient. What else would await her as she took on this task? She couldn't imagine it would be easy. Not everyone was openly prejudiced against Black people, but at his age it was unlikely he would have a good attitude about their differences. She wondered if Zachary had been born in California, or if, like most people, he had come from some other part of the country. If he came from the South, he could be trouble. She hoped not. She desperately needed this job, and the ability to get along with Zachary was essential. If only she'd had time to finish her nursing degree, things would have been different. She could have gotten a job in a doctor's office or in a hospital, both positions preferable to the one she was taking now. Marrying her high school boyfriend when they were barely out of school was a big mistake. Her son was born 8 months later. Now she couldn't imagine aborting her baby. Then it was a difficult decision. Marrying Jesse Henderson, the father, was the only option. It hadn't been easy, but she managed to make her way into nursing school when Jamal was 3. Before she had a chance to graduate, the marriage was over, and now she had to work. Jesse had never been much of a wage earner, and the divorce netted her nothing in the way of alimony or child support. Jesse had been her first love. They had met in high school, and she had fallen in love immediately without any thought about what she might be in for. He was hard to resist. He was handsome, tall and slender, wore dreadlocks, and instead of dressing like the other kids, he wore clothes more suitable to an ethnic culture. Long white cotton pants tied by drawstrings, and a long-sleeve white cotton Nehru shirt. He had studied stuff on the internet and wanted to be more like his ethnic ancestors. Cleo thought that was really hot. He even wore beads around his neck and leather bracelets. Everyone in her class thought he was killer hot. All the girls thought he was the best catch around, and most campaigned for his attention. When he went for her, she felt truly special, like an African princess. She didn't know that he kept a lot of girls around, and women later when they were married. He'd never given them up. Jesse once told her that his African ancestors were more real about sex. They kept harems, had many marriages at once. Of course, women didn't do such things. That was entirely reserved for men. It was sexist in his soul. Jesse said he had a strong libido and had to satisfy his need, that one woman could never be enough for him. He left her with few choices. She had to divorce him. He wasn't spending any time on supporting her and Jamal, always chasing after some dream or other. Quitting school and going to work was her best option. So she took it, and now it was taking her to Glendale, a sleepy municipality near downtown L.A. Finally reaching the bus at Olive Street, she found it was unimaginably crowded. People were practically hanging out the windows like she'd heard folks did in other overcrowded countries. Cleo hoped the transit home would be less congested than this one. It was stuffy and uncomfortable. The heat was oppressive, the air conditioning apparently not working. She struggled to find an empty seat when suddenly a young man rose to get off the next stop. Grabbing the plastic bench, she sat down hard, noticing a sharp pain as it traveled down her leg. The sweat trickled down the side of her face. Thankfully, she had worn her hair in a tight bun at the back of her neck, and her work clothes were a light cotton. Nevertheless, she perspired profusely, hoping her uniform would not show unsightly stains under the arms. Phyllis at the agency had stressed Hughes was fussy about cleanliness. She also wished she had brought along a book to read or a puzzle to absorb the enormous amount of time it would take to get there. Another nagging thought. She hoped her large breasts that hung down, nudging themselves out from under the bra, would stop sweating and making her uncomfortable. She could feel little trickles of perspiration. The summer air was too hot, and there was little she could do about it. She wondered if those panty liners she'd seen at the grocery store, the ones her mom wore to absorb light bladder leaks, might be a solution to the perspiration under her breasts. It was a possibility, and she decided to borrow some from Edith to see if they worked.
Corinne,
Yes.
this is a work, and we've never done this before, and we're working right here in the present. And we have about 1 minute before Aram comes on. So
Right.
if pardon me for the interruption, pardon me to Diane McBain. We didn't know how long this would take. You began reading the first chapter and you're a certain amount of time into the second chapter. So we're going to have to leave it there. But let me just say this, that what I heard was the characters, the ambiance, the dialogue, and the transfixing story by Diane McBain are told with authenticity, empathy, and vividness. And you read, cold, you read it superlative. And also, I just want to say you can feel the fear and the injustice and the bad treatment of the whites against the blacks in that first chapter. And then the character in the second chapter, the tenderness and all the honest reality that Diane wrote in there. So all I can say is this is a taste of Diane McBain's wonderful book. I always loved Diane's writing. And the one thing I like about her is I see her here on the campus and I've seen her sit down and do the writing. She has a great focus and she does the work and she creates such wonderful stories. And so please forgive us for not having the time to do more justice to her work, but we've done the best we could. And so thank you for coming in at the last minute, Corinne. You rescued us and you gave a beautiful reading. So thank you for that. And our next reader is Aram Saroyan. Aram Saroyan, I'll wait till he appears on the screen so that I can make sure he's there.
I'm here.
Aram Saroyan, best known as a poet, is also a playwright. At the Beach House, had a 6-week limited engagement at the Lost Studio, starring Orson Bean and Donna Dietrich in 2005. He will tell us the play that he's going to read from today. But one thing I want to say that Aram's play at the Beach House was a delight. It was about 3 generations of women. His dialogue was superb, and he really knows how to tell a story. He writes poetry, memoirs, prose, or novels, and this play that he's going to read from. Here's a marvelous playwright, Aram Saroyan.
Thank you, Harry. And I enjoyed the Diane McBain piece, what we heard of it. This is, the second in a series of plays. At the Beach House was the first. This one is called Pollen Count. And like At the Beach House, it's set in LA, and it's about 3 couples, all but one of whom are in their 50s. In the town where youth is at a premium, and after 40 or 30, you're in trouble, especially if you're an actor. But this is about 3 kind of literary bohemians in Los Angeles. And periodically during the play, the lights go down and a spot comes on one character, and and that character does a little bit of a monologue. And I'm going to start off with the younger person in the of these six people, and that's a woman named Cheryl, and she's with an older guy, and so she says, "I love it at night. Max stops talking, and I can participate in the silence the way I used to." The way I used to do when I'd play hooky with Kevin, this gay guy who lived on my street in Cerritos, and we'd do ecstasy together and walk around the mall on weekday mornings when it was empty and go to the first show at the Cineplex. I'm now living with a man who's completely self-obsessed, and it's actually sort of a secure feeling. I mean, it's something you can count on, like furniture, the table, the chair, the bed. And there he is, Max, very absorbed by Max. It's sort of endearing, and he is attractive. I mean, maybe that's what's attractive, that consistency. It's terrible when you're really not sure. Maybe he's not a complete egomaniac 24/7. And if he isn't, I may have been a little over the top when I bought the bedroom set just to snap him to attention. Here's a man who is essentially happy with a word processor and a cup of Arrowhead. I know I'm supposed to be thinking about a career, but I'm not really ready, not in this town, which is run by very competitive men who love to keep women jumping through hoops 24/7 just so they feel secure in their identities. I loved movies and television when I was a kid, and that's something I share with Max. He's watched a lot of television, and so have I. But I remember lying on the lawn with Kevin at 2 a.m, and my mind just stopped. A lot of people think that means you become an idiot, but anyone who has ever gotten stoned knows it's not that. You basically change places with the universe. You go inside out. It's a very nice, secure feeling, like you're a perfect fit. It's another security thing, I guess. My father left my mother when I was little, and I grew up with all these fantastic women and a few third-rate men. Every 4th of July, we'd all go to the Hollywood Bowl and hear the orchestra do a lot of famous American songs, and I'd take care of my little nieces and nephews. Then I got into drugs, and that just sort of ruled me for a couple of years until I went to my first meeting. I met Max at one of my meetings. We went out to fellowship at Denny's, and then we went home, and I blew his mind. So that's the first of these monologues. And the second one is Max. I risked my life to be where I am, wherever that may be. Not like these young punks who think if they dress a certain way, they're bad. I slept in the snow above steam grates for a little warmth in the New York winter. I went out with black women because they were warm, tender, instead of these cold white chicks who have their eye on some future that doesn't even exist where it's supposed to exist. I was a punk kid, and I didn't take shit from anybody, and also read books morning, noon, and night. I read James T. Farrell and Oscar Wilde and James Joyce, and that's just to name 3 Irishmen. Before I got into the program, I would have just decked these goofs you see running around today with their goddamn email careers, clocked them. I recognized that that was a cultural liability I brought to the table that derived out of my own insecurities. And in the high 60s, my wife made it clear just how she felt about it by not only having an affair with a woman in our commune, but encouraging me to have an affair with a guy in our commune who was gay. If you look good in the gay community, it's like a bonanza. You don't have to search for sex for 1 second. You get it 24/7, as Cheryl would say. Guys are very direct. I came out and then found myself reading with the current pantheon in the garden at the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, etc. I mean, here I am, this guy from Newark, who'd been in the service and been a student with 45 part-time jobs at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop, and suddenly I'm the toast of New York, the new Frank O'Hara. I got quite a tour of the inner workings of the literary establishment. I mean, a taxi ride with one of these movers and shakers, and the next thing I know, a guy I put in a good word for gets the goddamn National Book Award. The poor guy had just come out, too, and it was a little more legit on his part. I mean, he leaves his wife and 3 kids and moves in with a young new formalist, pardon the expression. Paul keeps telling me to write this. I know a guy who's won every serious literary prize other than the Nobel who smokes weed before he boots up, which is why his verse is so surprising. Right, Henry Bailey. I slept with him. How did that happen? He explains how he made it with Auden, and Auden made it with a guy who had made it with Whitman. It's a direct transmission, no pun intended, or every one of them intended. What a line, huh? And I fell for it. Look, part of the attraction of getting this side of myself into the loop is that coming from this Irish lower middle class patriarchy, it was necessary for me to make like official documentation of my feminine side, not to get it completely repressed. I realized that as a kid, I had enjoyed the movie Carousel, but admitting that in my neighborhood wasn't a good idea. So I repressed it. And it came back to me how much I enjoyed it while I was a gay man. But that's not the most important part. The most important part was one night when I put on a dress. I was flying on acid as I'm coming down the stairs, and I see this beautiful chick, man. She looks right at me, smiling a little, you know. And I go right up to her, and she's me in the mirror. It was the cosmic Zap, or maybe Zap Comics. I joined the force. I became infinity, which is a complete sexual circuitry then and there. But after about a year, I found the tug of heterosexuality reasserting itself. And then when I abandoned the gay scene, I became persona non grata and was effectively exiled from literary viability. It says something about something, but I don't really care because I was such an alcoholic that was actually my issue. And it turned out to be my salvation. AA, the program. And then okay. The third monologue is by a guy named Jason, who's married to Nancy, who's a home decorator, who's doing the home of a movie star. And he, meanwhile, is struggling because he's part of a blues band. And, excuse me, he's part of a blues band. And there's a woman with the band who's kind of helping out a young woman, and he has a crush on her. And this is, the spotlight goes up on with him. I took her up to Zuma Beach. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Nancy was up to her ears in Annie Roy. I'd been to talk to a guy straight out of The Godfather about doing a showcase with the band at the Starlight on Melrose. So I have all the weight of my terrible career and then the possibility of a gig scoring this film about menopause. I don't know. Did they pick my name out of a hat? It's like that story about the producer who takes his black writer out to lunch about doing a movie based on Malcolm a few years before Spike Lee did it. So he says to this black writer, I've got the guy to play Malcolm. It came to me last night. I woke up in the middle of the night and there it was. Who? The writer asks him. Neil Diamond, the producer says. Neil Diamond. That's my career. I guess I could ask Nancy about menopause. But anyway, while I go through this little dance with these suits who are all a half to a third my age, I have this other part of me that's swimming in sadness and romance, the incredible feeling thing, and it's from Tammy. She knows it too. I've got this music going through me, sitting in these offices with these goons in their Armani suits who like me because they're into blues. These cats are into Muddy Waters. I wish Stevie were alive so we could laugh about these cats talking about Muddy. Do you know him? Yeah, I know him, and he would really dig you, man. And your car. Muddy would dig these wheels, man. The Porsche. And so would Albert, man. Albert King. Let's all get together because I want to bring them in for the picture. Shit, I'm pimping the music, the little Jew boy intermediary. And then I remember her and I'm back in the music. So we go out to Zuma and we're lying on the sand and I'm looking at her blonde hair and her perfect little nose. And I could take her in my arms and just weep, man, about everything. I might have been about to do it too, although I know I love Nancy. And suddenly the tide comes up and soaks us. But it wasn't From Here to Eternity. It was a Woody Allen thing, or out of the Airplane movies. Nancy probably knows exactly what's going on, but I haven't really done anything. I almost did something at Zuma and the tide came up. I know I can't fuck her. Believe me, she knows it too. She probably likes having this guy crazy over her who doesn't even go to bed with her. It's flattering. And then this part is not quite a monologue, but it's Paul, who's part of another couple, getting a call from Jason, who we just heard from. It's so funny. So he's on the phone with Jason, and meanwhile he and Max are together because Cheryl threw Max out. Or so they're rooming. So anyway, Max is overhearing this conversation. Nope, not a word, man. Sharon's actually not talking to me in that way. Our conversations are very nuts and bolts, which car kind of thing. Well, that's good, I think. I mean, I know you're going through something and it probably just needs to work its way through your system. I mean, it's not that hard for us to resent it when our wife makes, real money. Sure, humiliating even. Yeah, no, man, but I would try to keep some kind of perspective. I don't know how I can talk that way because I know exactly what it's like. I know you didn't. No, I knew that. I never for a moment thought that you did or even would. Well, maybe not would, but I knew you didn't. Did you? Exactly. I knew that. Absolutely. Because you told me. Her nose? Straight, smooth. Absolutely. Because you. And small. Yeah, I see what you mean. And white. No, I know what you mean. Not ethnic, like a wasp. It's amazing. These people seem to have no blood in their veins. And they're these savage predators. They killed the Indians, built the railroads, chopped down the sequoias, and now the rainforests, et cetera. And they've got these very bland, very bloodless kind of, what does it mean? I know you didn't fuck her, man. You told me that. And I know you won't. Neither one, I swear to God. I mean, I really don't talk to Nancy, ever. You too, man. Yeah, take care. Okay, and this is Annie Roy, who's the movie star that Nancy is designing her apartment, and this is kind of the end of the play, and she has this monologue. Get a little water here. going to step in here before we give away the store. Do you get this? It's like what? A sort of combination of a Clifford Odets 1930s protest play with Pirandello's 6 characters in search of an author? Can we wake up and smell the coffee? It's sort of sad, really. I mean, here they are, these wonderful women, and what do they have in common? They're stuck with, or barely coming unstuck from, all these terrible tears and crises and everything, these sort of bland minor league guys. I mean, did anyone happen to notice Orson Welles in this crowd? Not that Orson wasn't rather transparent himself. What bothers me is not that they love each other deep down. Look, I think it's very sweet, and I know they have a nice, cozy little scene they can all go home to, and I don't, and sometimes I wish I did. But do you see how these guys are calling the shots? And that's exactly what's making them miserable. Of all of them, Max is the only one who actually suspects there might be some gain in cosmically reversing that circuitry. And that's because he'll never live down going gay for a while in the 70s. Like, oh my God, Max, you did? That's terrible, honey. But don't worry, because you were out of the death window of opportunity. Lucky for you. And now Mama can make it better. I mean, Hemingway wanted to be the woman in his sexual relationships, but these women just don't get it. I'm like this big star in America because men associate having sex with me with being murdered. It's a fucking metaphor for giving up their rigid panoply of sexual armor and melting. It's what they all want to do, but they don't know how. And now Nancy, who was designing her house, shoulders her way up to the spotlight and jokingly elbows Annie out of the light. And this is going to be the last of these monologues and the end of this reading. Nancy, all right, the movie star had her say, we all love her, but sweetheart, you missed the deal, okay? I wish I had your money, but you don't really know how to spend it other than on my paycheck, for which I'm grateful. Okay, Stevie Drake, who everybody knows played the best blues guitar this side of Hendrix, and he was white, was my first boyfriend. And I learned as an only child of a Jewish couple in Chicago that there was something in these men of our generation that was different from our fathers, than my father, who was a good, decent, tax-paying CPA whose family came from a rural area outside Kiev. And we women better cut them a little slack or we were going to go on living in the most boring fucking culture the world has ever known. The only thing it had going for it was that it was sanitary. And I'm sorry, but that didn't make up for the fact that everything was completely brain dead. All Stevie was someone with a little energy who tapped into the blues they were playing in the black clubs in Chicago and who could see that these people were having a better time than anyone in his family had since coming over on the boat. Then drugs came along and sliced and diced us, but it doesn't matter what they say on the news because the word got out about happiness. That's all the 60s really was about. Happiness. And believe me, the kids got it and they're still running with it, all weirdnesses notwithstanding. I wish I had Annie's figure and her charisma, but those movies she makes are pieces of crap because happiness is about getting in balance and family and men and women, right? It's very subtle, actually. It's not big. It's a little gentle thing. And this country can ride roughshod over its women and its children and its men too. But the word is already out. Trust me. And I've got problems. I know that.
It's fabulous. I love the humor, the satire. I have a couple of things. You write dialogue with such effortlessness, and I have a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. Was number one was Max based on the wonderful poet Michael Lally, and the other one, to me, you're right out of more modern. But I get the feeling like, even though you talked about the Irish writers earlier on, you brought up Hemingway, I feel a sense of Salinger in there. I always love Salinger, but
Oh, me too. Yeah.
have such a sense of humor and acuteness in observing people. What would you like to say, Corinne?
Oh well, I was just I was just enjoying Aram's reading. I'm very anxious to see this play.
Well,
Yes.
you've got some actors there.
Yeah, no, I'd love to be in your play. Yeah.
Oh, that would be wonderful, actually. You're welcome to do a reading of the play on Zoom or however you. It's a pretty simple situation if somebody read the directions. Actually,
Sure.
it's a funny play. It's a funny play. The dialogue is funny, but I was going through it and I was figuring out how can I do this, and I thought, well, easiest would be the monologues. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your reading. I mean, you were I really got grabbed by it.
Well, fortunately, I had heard that Diane read some of this at Grey Quill when she was writing it.
Oh.
And not this first part, but, I was really into the story. So once I got into the second chapter, I realized that was the character that I was so interested in knowing what happened to her.
Well, you did a great job,
Really an interesting story. But, let's talk about this. In her book, The Color of Hope, the N-word was used a great deal. And Harry had said to me before I started to read, we don't accept this, or it is not accepted at MPTF, which of course it shouldn't. It's not a word that we should be using. But when we're doing literature and when we're reading a story where it is so important, it kind of just describes the people that she was so affected by. I find it, it seems to be kind of necessary because it adds so much color.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but these days it would just ring out as an alarm, because of what's going on. It's just so. It's such a hard word to hear these days.
I know.
And also, I would like to just say what Aram's talking about. I remember years ago, Allen Ginsberg was on Charlie Rose, and he said, I can't use the words in my poetry, even though it's taught in school. I can't use it on TV. And so my point of view, I talked about this with Jennifer before the show started, and it came on as a surprise that we had to, that I had to ask you to come on at the last minute. So I'm grateful that you came on in the last minute. But I think what I think about is MPTF is here to help people, and it's not here to harm people. And any word that harms people, I understand what you're saying. I read my poetry at LACMA, and there were these nudes behind me, by Renoir. And I used some words that I would not use on, in terms of my, my intimacy with my wife, Holly. And I wouldn't use that on the word. I wouldn't use it on this particular program out of discretion. So I understand what you're saying, and please forgive us, Diane McBain. But I think that it's the right thing to do. And I will. It's 2:00. I want to thank both of you, and I will let Jennifer Clymer have obviously she's the director of the program, and let her give the final word about what we're just talking about.
And we have a caller, so let's see. Offline. Okay. Bye, Bob.
Bye.
So one of the items that Diane and I talked about a long time ago when Grey Quill was on the program was we have to be very mindful of everyone who has an opportunity to tune in and watch. And not everybody is watching from the very beginning of the show. And if there's a moment where someone hears something out of context and it causes harm or distress, or puts the person saying that word, even though it's performance, even though it's interpretive, if it puts you in an awkward position with one of your neighbors, I'm not interested in being a platform that facilitates that either. So I do agree there is absolutely space and time for the expression of what is historically accurate in context of this literary expression, but here is not the place for it. Just again, because this is something that we want to have everyone feel welcome and foster that kind of creativity. And anytime that there's a word that's so hurtful, just, I mean,
Yeah.
hurtful.
Mhm.
And I'm not interested in censorship either, but there has to be a line between, I mean, it's the slander and libel laws, right? You can't just say anything in this country. But for me, that's one of those things that I feel like should be a carve out for us as a community, that's just not an acceptable word, whatever the context is. In Gray Quill, in a place where it is a situation where everyone knows where that word is generating from and what it's referencing, and that's a safe space for that, sure. But we don't have any idea who's tuning in, when they're tuning in, and I felt like that was an acceptable place to draw a line.
Well, I think it's wonderful that we all have finally come to our senses, perhaps. So I agree with what you're saying. I'm happy that that's the major feeling now, that we've all got it. So I shouldn't be knocking it because I want to make it more dramatic. Yeah.
But I understand that. And that's one thing that I want you to know. In that moment when you're reading in Diane's book, that's the correct word to say in the context of that reality.
Well, they were nasty people, so
people. Yes.
There's nothing more
Also,
expressive. Yeah.
There's a difference between reading it on the page and reading it over the airwaves. Because people do talk these days about how there needs to be, for both women and minorities, not just change, but systemic recognition of the systemic change that needs to happen, which is not, which involves like what goes on the airwaves and a kind of respect or protocol that needs to be there,
Yeah. I also think we have this opportunity, especially on the heels of Juneteenth. If we're watching a lot of the content that was being offered and shared as a way of enlightenment and education, it's important also where that comes from, what the source of that is. And yeah, there are contexts that I feel like if we had someone who was scholarly, let me also say this. We don't edit the films that we show here. We're not censoring that content because in the context of a film or a television show made off of the campus that then gets played here, it's very clear that it is in the totality of the reality presented. You have the costumes, you have the orchestration, it's clear that is a word generated in a correct historical context. Here, as I said, impossible for someone to tune in just as you're about to say a word that's really harmful and not be able to separate. This is not your point of view. It's something that's being
right. Okay.
You know what I mean? Because again, I just want people to know we're not sitting here micromanaging everything that goes on the air, but I will always step up in the protection of the minority of people. Could be the majority of people here think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But if one person is going to be hurt by it, I'm going to stand for that one person. Okay. Soapbox off.
Well, I just want to get back and say one last thing, if I may, that Aram, your playwriting is a delight. You're a master at writing monologues. I know you gave me a book of yours one time with Artie Shaw, among others. And so I always love your writing. And Diane McBain, if you're watching, I love your writing. And Corinne, you're just one of the great actor readers of all time. You stepped in at the last minute and rescued us. And so I'm thankful to you. And I'm once again thankful to Aram. So thank you both for this wonderful show and also the discussion, because, you know, it's also important for us to discuss these issues, if you will. And lastly, I will just say this, that MPTF is here to help all of us. And it's here also, it's not here to harm anybody. And so it's open. And so thank you, MPTF, and thank you, Jennifer Clymer.
And thank you, Harry.